A young hunter in Oregon has a Bigfoot run past him 50 feet away while he's hunting with his father. Hear his reaction plus a lot more coming up next. Alright, welcome to WILLSTAR Monsters and Mysteries. Today, I have 3 Bigfoot sighting reports for you. One of the sightings involves a young man while he's hunting with his father in Oregon. He has a creature run right past him, and at first he doesn't realize what it is. I have another one in Oregon where a hiker has a sighting of a Bigfoot scampering up a hill. I also have a very fascinating encounter with a young camper in Wyoming. Wait till you hear all about this one. And finally, at the end I have a bonus newspaper article from Nevada having to do with a creature they encounter in the Antelope Mountain Range. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thanks for stopping by. If you like what you see, go ahead and hit that sub button for me. I appreciate it. And remember everybody, if you guys like the video, make sure you hit the like button. YouTube is clearly addicted to that like button, so we need to hit it to keep them happy. Alright, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get into this. Albany County, Wyoming, 2001. I definitely want to share this with you. This was in the Snowy Mountain Range near Laramie, Wyoming, July of 2001 at about 9:30 a.m. I've been online reading up on stories from all over the country that people have submitted of Bigfoot sightings that they've experienced. As I read them, I realized how shockingly close they are to what I saw. When I was a sophomore in high school, my mom was dating a man named Steve. He had a four-wheeler and we'd always go camping. We went to the Snowy Range mountain range near Laramie, Wyoming and camped up there one weekend. Steve and his buddies were dredging for gold, and my buddy Kevin and I, along with my brother, were riding the four-wheeler around having a good time. I went out on a solo run, and that's when I experienced my sighting. Now what you have to understand is the area we were in was pretty hard to get lost in. A huge, incredibly wide dirt road led directly from our camp to a massive meadow that led down off the mountain. In the other direction, about 100 yards or so down the dirt road, was the creek in which the guys were dredging. The main road leads you to everywhere. As I rode past the creek, I saw another dirt road leading into the woods. I figured I'd go explore it a little bit, so I went in there. As I followed the road, I could see a few deer skipping around in there. The area was full of trees, but plenty of sunlight got through, and the area was actually very pleasant. Eventually, the road narrowed and gradually disappeared, and the trees became closer together. The area off in that direction was clearly still rather unexplored, and I didn't feel like getting lost in there. As I turned the four-wheeler around, I was met with an incredible sight. A pretty small black bear had wandered out of the woods and walked right up to me. I braced myself for the worst, but instead the poor guy was shaking. He came right up to me and pressed his body up against the four-wheeler. He didn't look like he was very old at all. I was genuinely worried about him, and then all of a sudden, what I figured to be his mother charged out of the woods about 20 feet to my left. She ran right up to me and the young bear, looked at me, and quickly nudged the little bear away from me. She looked at me again, and there was something about the look in her eyes. They wandered off, and I sat there wondering what the heck just happened. I swear I'm not making this up. Why didn't the mother bear attack me? And why was the mother bear not acting defensive around her cub? Then I heard it. It was the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. It started low, like a really deep lion's roar. As it grew in intensity, it sounded like a lion mixed with a low bass sound that oscillated a bit. The louder it got, it became higher pitched until it sounded like a woman screaming in absolute terror. It continued for about 6 seconds or so. It sounded like a woman was being slaughtered out in those woods, but yet it had an unhuman shriek to it as well. I wasted no time in getting out of that area. I rode down the main road and I passed the guys who were in the creek. I stopped and just looked at them. They were standing there looking around kind of shocked and asked me if I was messing around and making that scream. I said I wasn't, and then we saw the 2 bears crossing the creek a little ways down. You could tell they were in a hurry. The guy stood there for a minute and then went back to dredging. I rode down the main road and out into the clearing that led out of the mountain. I saw a group of cars heading in. They disappeared into the woods to presumably go make camp somewhere. Brave souls. I rode for a bit, then turned around and headed back to camp. As I approached the tree line, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked to my right, toward the area of the unexplored woods I had been in. There was an area of trees at the base of an incredibly steep peak, and the trees went up as far as the eye could see. I spotted a figure within those trees, and it was just standing there looking at me. All I could really make out was that it was black or dark brown, standing on 2 feet. It turned and began striding up the summit with almost no effort at all. You could actually hear the crashing of the trees and shrubbery as it made its way up the mountain. I rode back to camp in a hurry. As I rode back, I could hear another scream far off in the distance, almost as if something were answering the first scream I had heard. Since it was our last day on the mountains, the guys had started packing up their gear and we were leaving. I was admittedly relieved that we were getting out of there. Steve pulled me aside once I got back to camp and asked me if I had heard those screams. I told him I had, and then I told him about those bears and what I saw going up the mountain. He was skeptical, but he told me that we shouldn't tell my mom or my little brother since they'd most likely wig out on us. We took the four-wheeler out to the meadow in which I saw the thing. There was no bad smell, which is sometimes reported with Bigfoot sightings, but there were full-grown trees ripped right out of the ground. Branches, foliage, and leaf debris was everywhere. The smell of fresh pine and sap was very strong. We couldn't figure out what the heck could have done that, but it looked like a tornado went through there ripping up the place. We left that day, and we never told anybody else about it. The other guys that went with us to Dredge had heard the screams and acknowledged that something was not right, but they wanted to leave it at that though. I haven't been back there since, but I wouldn't mind getting a group together and heading up that way again to explore it. My experience is so similar to ones everywhere else that it's pretty remarkable. However, I'm still unsure of what I saw, and I can't really make a conclusive claim that in fact I did see a Bigfoot. I do believe that they most likely exist, but I'm still unsure. I'm not very experienced with the outdoors. The screams I heard could have been anything really. I do think it's pretty big coincidence that it matches up with the other experiences though. I could have seen a bear or something standing on its hind legs, but it did not look like a bear. It looked like a hairy man, and it was huge. Hood River County, Oregon, September 2002. On Tuesday, September 24th, 2002, I was hiking alone on the Ruckle Creek Trail near Cascade Locks. The time was about 4 p.m. and I was beginning to descend the area known as the Benson Plateau. The trail was very dry and dusty, and the steep descent required that I walk very carefully. As a result, I made almost no sound at all. There was suddenly a very loud crashing sound from close by, and my thoughts were that a bear had been surprised. At first I saw nothing, but the sound indicated that an animal was fleeing up the steep hillside. Then for about 2 seconds from a distance of about 100 feet, I could clearly see what looked like a large gorilla running up the hill. Only the back was visible, and it was black. The animal was only visible from the waist up. It had a powerful back and shoulders, and a very large head that rose to a distinct hump, much as it does in pictures of some apes. I do not know how big it was, other than to say it was a lot bigger than me. The head was particularly massive, I thought. The animal apparently tripped and fell forward, but caught itself and kept moving up through the dense thicket. At that moment, it turned its head enough for me to see its head and face in profile. It had a distinct nose, but there was little else that I could distinguish. At this point, I went for my camera. This took a few seconds though. When I looked up again, I could see motion but could not make out the animal. There was a fallen tree about 150 feet up the hill, and it began to rock up and down at a uniform rate. It made a corresponding creaking and rubbing sound, and this continued for some time, perhaps 15 seconds, keeping my attention drawn to that spot, but seeing nothing but the tree bobbing up and down like it was being deliberately shaken at a uniform amplitude. Then it suddenly stopped, and I could hear nothing. Then I noticed a motion about 50 feet to the right of the tree, and I thought I could see a face looking at me. The face seemed smaller than the animal that I had saw earlier, but it still looked like a face and shoulders against a lighter backdrop. I stood with the camera ready, knowing that the animal was still there and expecting it to stand up and show itself again. But this waiting game went on for perhaps 2 minutes. Then I began to wonder if the animal was in fact gone, and perhaps I was looking at some strangely shaped stump because it did not move, and I cannot see it well enough to tell exactly what it was. At this point, I took a picture, thinking I might blow up the photo later for closer study to determine if anything was in fact there. It occurred to me that I should move around a bit and try to find a better angle, but there was no better position than where I was, and caution prohibited me from moving closer. When I returned to my original position, I no longer could see the face. I stayed around and listened and watched for a while, but noticed nothing else. The trail itself was very dusty and took prints well. My own prints were very clear, but there were no other prints that I could see. During the incident, I smelled nothing. When the digital picture was lightened and adjusted for contrast, the head that appeared to be looking at me did look like it could be real. But in the background was what could be another bigger animal. The larger image in the background is about the right size for the animal that I saw, but the front of the animal looks like a light tan. I just took the picture and that's all I know about it. The picture quality is very poor. I went back to the site 2 times to try to locate the exact position from clues in the picture, but have been unable to relocate it exactly. I wanted to get another look and take another picture from the same location just to make sure I was not seeing something that just looked like what I was trying to see. I did go back about 2 days later and explore the place where the animal might have been headed. The area is called Rudolph Spur. All I found there was a pile of crap that was as flat as a pancake and looked like tar. It was the size a very large human might leave. Hood River County, Oregon, October 1970. In 1970, I was 15 years old deer hunting east of the Mount Hood National Wilderness Area in Oregon. My dad stuck me on a huge stump and went off to my right, and our neighbor went off to my left. The stump partially embraced me like a recliner. It was huge. Also, it was a good place to sit for a long time. My view was a meadow and heavy brush. Large Douglas firs bordered the area, perhaps 3 acres. This was back when large fir trees still existed, and these were being logged in abundance. I had never heard of Bigfoot, read anything about him, or had any idea whatsoever that such things existed in the woods. I am very comfortable in the woods. Evidently, as I was trusted by my father and neighbor as they left me with a .303 British. Pretty big deal as a 15-year-old. After about 2 hours later, I hear a rustle to my right. I click off my safety and slowly move my gun and body to see. Immediately, I thought it was my father running at full speed through the woods. Odd behavior, but I clicked my safety back on and watched what I thought was my dad run through the brush. He ran about 50 feet in front of me from right to left. The heavy brush came up to his breast area. Heavy steam came out in regular intervals as he ran. It was quite a sight. I didn't understand why the branches weren't making that scraping noise on his parka. My dad wore a rust-colored parka popular at the time. One thing he never did though was wear the hood, but it appears as though Dad had his hood on while running through the woods. Very odd. My dad was an athlete and physically fit most of his life, played all the sports, but I thought at the moment he was particularly athletic running through the woods with amazing grace. I sat there pondering what had just happened when I hear another crashing noise to my right. I looked there and there is Dad stomping through the woods making all kinds of noise. He was still hunting. I was stunned to see him on my right as I had just saw him pass from view on my left. But now he looks real tiny and the brush is a foot or 2 over his head. He looks small and weak and definitely not athletic. I could hear his every footstep. I was 15, too young I think to be scared. I know every type of animal in the woods, and I am struggling with what I had just seen. The hunt has obviously come to a close as Dad is exhausted. Still confused, I said, "Did you just run by here?" Dad replies, "Are you kidding? I could barely stand up out here." Then I explained to him that I had saw something run by. I told him I thought it was you. Only when I saw you, I realized what I saw was huge, very fast and very powerful. I described to my dad what I had seen. I was not frightened. What I saw was an intelligent human-looking animal running with purpose, speed, grace, and power. The kind you find from creatures in nature. Although he was running very fast, the noise was very minimal. He made less noise running than my dad did walking. About 6 months later, I was reading a story in a magazine about some kids in the Dalles, Oregon, chasing and shooting a creature. My blood went cold. It was then I realized what I had seen earlier. In the subsequent years, I have seen numerous stories on the creature. Science says without proof they don't exist. Normal people are labeled as kooks, or they saw a bear, deer, or an elk. I know exactly what I saw, and I know Bigfoot exists because I have seen one running like the wind. Alright, now I have a newspaper article from Eureka, Nevada, 1879. 2 hunters chased by a wild man in the Antelope Mountains. November 8th, 1879. William Sheegan, who came in from Antelope Valley last evening with a load of produce, tells our reporter a very strange and startling story of the experience of two men who were hunting in Antelope Valley last week. He says that Peter Simons and John Gore had been out all day hunting ducks and such other game as came in their way, and as evening came on, they took a shortcut across the mountains on their way back to the ranch. The mountain over which the trail led them was a very rugged one, in fact, the wildest place in the Antelope Range of mountains, and a few years ago used to be infested with the larger species of wild animals. As they were slowly picking their way around the edge of a large chasm, they heard a slight noise near a rugged cliff and saw a huge hairy object, apparently half man and half beast, spring from behind a cliff and start for the other side of the mountain, running with the speed of the wind. Mistaking it for a wild animal, one of the hunters, Gore, fired at it. The shot appeared to take effect in the arm, for with a scream of pain the creature halted, touched the wound, and turning, charged its pursuers, who with empty guns in hand dared not measure strength with such a foe. Dropping their guns, both sought safety in flight, and stopped only when compelled to do so from lack of ability to run further. The men say that they are positive that this creature resembled a man in general appearance. It was wild-eyed and very fierce in its disposition, judging from the short time they saw it. Mr. Sheegan's story revives a long-forgotten but now distinctly recalled yarn, to the effect that many years ago a lunatic, then a young man, escaped from his keepers in California and gained the vastness of the Sierra Nevada, where he evaded pursuit and, it is thought, subsisted on the flesh of small animals killed through some means best known to himself. Several months ago, says Sheegan, a strange creature answering the description of the being recently seen was discovered by a party of men who were hunting on the mountain some 15 miles from Antelope, and it is thought that this may be the same. The hunters say that they are positive that this was no optical illusion, but a genuine wild man, and a very fierce one at that. The creature's arms, they say, were long and hairy, and it looked very much like a full-grown gorilla. They said it ran with remarkable swiftness, all the time uttering loud cries, as though in pain and enraged. They declare that it was only by their utmost exertion that they escaped their pursuer, and they say that there is not enough gold in Nevada to hire them to again venture across its path.